Thanks for joining us for the webinar. My name is Henning Pisunker. I'm an associate professor at INSEAD, currently visiting the Wharton Business School. And this is actually the first iteration of kind of a new series on Between the Lines, where we interview various top management authors who kind of share with us insights from the cutting edge of management research. And today it's with great pleasure that we welcome Herminia Ibarra. Herminia, can you join us? Wonderful.
Everybody.
Good to see you. I think we're already welcoming 300 people on the call. I believe, if I'm correctly informed, this is actually a new record for the INSEAD webinars, and so I'm very excited that we are off to a good start here. I will later on say towards the end who is joining us for the next set of webinars. We have a Nobel laureate, we have students of Herminia, we have like shared professors from Wharton, Harvard, INSEAD, and so on. So I'm very excited about starting this off. Herminia, I'm going to say a few words about you. So most of the people in the audience, as my guests, already know you. However, I'm going to briefly summarize this. You graduated with a PhD from Yale. You then got the chaired professorship at Harvard Business School, a very kind of rare accomplishment. You went on to INSEAD, and afterwards, and where you are now, is the London Business School. I tried to explain this to my son over the weekend. He's 6 years old, and I said, this is a little bit as if you start out at Real Madrid, then you go to FC Bayern Munich, and then you join the FC Liverpool. And he said she must be very good, and I explained to him she is indeed. So it's with great pleasure to have you, and my son, who's in school now, would be otherwise excited to be here as well. The book we'll talk about is Working Identity. I can honestly say I've read the book from the top left to the bottom right. I've read every single word, which is something one often doesn't do for management books. Very often for management books, one reads the first 1, 2, or 3 chapters. In this case, I read it to the very end. I have absolutely no regrets whatsoever. I think the book is fantastic in many ways. It has stood the test of time. So for those of you who don't know, the second edition just came out in 2023. The book is updated. There's a new introduction. Then you can tell immediately, kind of from the references, from the cases, that the book is renewed. A few things about the book. Look, the book is thoughtful and research-based. And it then kind of pulls off, which is really kind of, which is quite an accomplishment. It's not just research-based, but it's also very practical. So it's actually, you have good insights, which are based in research, but then it's very easy to translate it into practice. Not easy for Herminia, but easy for the reader to then say like, oh, these are the checklists I can go through and so on. It is, I would say, beautifully written. I care about that. I have an idea about how much work goes into this. It's beautifully written. So even if you don't care about the subject, it's very well done. So please have a look. The book has stood the test of time. So in case you worry about, is this relevant in the times of ChatGPT and robotics and so on, you will find it tremendously helpful, I would say, in particular in these kind of times. But the book has clearly stood the test of time. The book is also, again, no small feature, it's very well organized. You can kind of, I read the book first, and then I went to the different chapters, and the chapters make more sense after if you read the book. It's beautifully organized, the different kind of parts. It's also entertaining. It's very empathetic. Herminia takes us on a beautiful kind of journey where we lead, I took this down, on the career transitions of Lucy, Gary, Ben. I don't have all the names. I think there are quite a few names in there. And we learn about all of those. And it's really, it's exciting to read. So Herminia, thank you so much kind of for joining us. This is fantastic. Herminia, what motivated you to write?
Thank you, Henning, for that introduction and for having read my full book beginning to end. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you.
Herminia, you open this up with a beautiful kind of quote from Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, somebody who I read a lot in high school, having gone to a German high school. And there's this beautiful opening. Then indecision brings its own delays, and days are lost lamenting over lost days, where you're kind of very much kind of pushing people towards actions. It's a general theme in the book. And I would love to kind of, if you could start us off, give us a little bit of an overview over the general idea of the book in that sense.
Okay, fantastic. So action is the general idea of the book. The book is about, what do I do if I want to change to a different career? And interesting, well, the subtitle of the book is Unconventional Strategies for Reinventing Your Career. When I first wrote the book 20 years ago, by the way, on a sabbatical at INSEAD, it was in my first days at INSEAD that I wrote that book. When I first wrote it, nobody had really actually studied how people go about changing careers. This kind of nonlinear career that we're used to now was still not very much the norm, and nobody had really studied it. And so as a result, the advice that people got when they wanted to change careers was really not in tune with how it happens and how people do it. The advice people got was sit down, reflect on your personality, your strengths, your values, and then figure out what you want to do so that then you can implement a plan. It turns out that for most people, that's a recipe for paralysis. And so that's why I start out with that quote from Goethe, because it basically says, get started, start, be bold, but get started. And that's really the most important thing. To this day, recently, I've been doing a lot of webinars on the book and on career change in general. And I have accumulated quite a number of kind of survey answers to the question, what's hard about making a career change? And the single one that comes up at the top of the list is, I know what I don't want, but I don't know what I want to do instead. I don't know what it is. And since I don't know what it is, I don't know where to start. And since I don't know where to start, I don't do anything at all. And that's the days lost lingering over the lost days. That gets into analysis paralysis. And so the book is about the alternative, how not to do that.
You see, one thing which I enjoyed so much about reading the book. So I'm in entrepreneurship. I'm in the entrepreneurship department. I teach a class on entrepreneurship. And at the beginning, when we invited you, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be a little bit of a stretch. Like, now I need to talk about careers. I need to do a lot of background research. And in many ways, you kind of foreshadowed in this book a lot of things that then happened kind of in the research on entrepreneurship, in kind of design thinking and so on. So I was, you acknowledge this in the revised edition, but a lot of these things that the research has since then kind of come up with in this field on entrepreneurship didn't exist. It
didn't exist. I mean, basically what I'm talking about is fast prototyping yourself in many ways, kind of using a lean methodology. It is very akin to design thinking, which is don't try to figure it all at the outset, but take steps, learn, and iterate. But those things didn't exist then. It just turned out that that's what people actually did to make their way to a new career.
Yeah, I have this session in my class on entrepreneurship, and the last session is called The Entrepreneurial Career, where I apply some lessons, and it very much kind of goes very well with this. So jumping a little bit kind of more into so maybe about the title of the book. Because you could have called this kind of career transitions, job change, or something like that, right? But you went for working identity, and I think the reason says a lot about you and about the book. Can you explain the title a little bit, rather than, because it is about career transitions, right? But you call it working identity. So what's the driver behind that?
Yeah. So I love that title. I didn't come up with it. My editor did, Melinda Marino, and I give her a lot of credit for that. I wanted to call it something very boring, like reinventing yourself, and that didn't, they didn't like that. And then we spent months brainstorming. But the insight she got is the book is about identity and who you are at work, and how that makes career change difficult. and how that's also what you're searching for. So the title's meant to evoke working your identity at work, who you are professionally, but at the same time, working it like a draft, like iterating your working identity. It has both sides to it. And that's what I love about that title.
I would love to dig a little bit deep into this, right? You anchor this kind of in the work by Stanford psychologist Hazel Markers and the different selves and the different identities. So how should the readers kind of think through this, right? So you have one identity, you have one career which you currently don't like, and now I'm looking for another. So can you say a little bit about kind of this process of exploring that?
So Hazel was brilliant in understanding, as a result of actually decades of research, that our identity is not just about our past formative experiences, and it's not just about the roles that we play today. It's also about our ideas about who we might become, whether they're desired selves or feared selves or what people think we ought to be. But those possible selves, and she's documented that they're multiple, they guide our attention and they motivate our behavior. And so they are really important. The thing is, well, our identities are multiple. We're a lot of different things, and our identities get very anchored in who we have been in the past and what we do today, because the work is, it consumes so much of our time. It structures our time, our activities, who we hang out with, the story we tell about who became that. And so changing careers challenges all of those things. And because identity is made up of what you do, the company you keep, the story you tell about yourself, to change careers, you've got to change all those things. You got to change the things you do, the networks you hang around in, the stories you tell about who you are. And so the process is about changing those things.
So closely, you call this in the book, and then you call this a deep change, right? So from the identities, like what are things that people, how should I say, it feels like we are talking about a job transition or a career transition, but in many ways we're talking about so much more than that, right? So it's kind of a change in the how I kind of almost like I was reminded of the book by the late Clay Christensen and how you measure your life. So can you say a little bit more about like why this change is so hard? What do you refer to when you mean deep change? How do people need to adjust more fundamentally?
Right. So there's a lot of layers. There's a lot of layers to that. Part of what I refer to is that when you're first looking to make a career change, all of what you're trying to change or fix and all of what you might want isn't immediately apparent to you because you haven't seen it yet. Just to take a step back, why do we change careers? Well, we change careers most of the time because we have to. One reason we change careers is we lose our jobs. Another reason is we haven't lost our jobs, but we don't really like it anymore. There's too much politics. There's no flexibility. There's not a real sense of meaning in it. I'm getting burned out. It doesn't work with the rest of my life. That's another reason. Still another reason is I've gotten involved in something else that seems a lot more exciting and a lot more interesting, and that's pulling me out. So those are the main reasons why. And those things are, they're very profound. They speak to our values, the way we want to live our lives, the people we want to surround ourselves with, what we enjoy, what we don't enjoy, what trade-offs are okay to make, what trade-offs are too much. And so ultimately, as we start going about making these changes, figuring out what is it, are these ideas, is this going to be attractive really? Is it going to be feasible? Am I going to be any good at it? Can I make a living at it? As you're learning about all of these things, you're also learning about yourself and what are your real values? What are your revealed preferences? Because you are voting with your feet around those things. And that allows you to realign. So for example, I'll give you an example. Some people will say, well, I don't care about money. Or I don't care about status and title. And then they cannot bring themselves to pass up an offer that is about that, even though it's going to plunk them right back down into some of the problems that they were wanting to avoid. And so sometimes that's a reason to kind of step back and say, okay, I've got to think about this a little bit more because this seems to matter to me. Either I'm not ready for a change, or I just need to acknowledge that this is important to me at this point in my life. So for some people, that deep change aspect is I really realize what matters and what doesn't matter, or I've reordered my priority structure. It wasn't so visible before. And now I can make choices on that basis because I've been able to verbalize it and see it.
So, so this brings me a little bit to we get a few questions up front, and please everybody feel we are monitoring the Q&A. So if you have questions to Herminia, please feel free to submit it in the Q&A. And Cesare had sent us a question up front, which relates quite a bit to what you just said. He wonders, when is it time to boost your career and when is time to reinvent or change your career, right? And you just alluded to this. Oh, I thought like status and money is not important to me, but then I suddenly have to face like, well, it is actually important to me. So I wonder when, yeah, how would you answer this question? When is it time to boost your career and rather do you reinvent it? Is that the right kind of way of thinking about it?
I mean, who knows? I've seen people reinvent it in their late 20s, in their 30s, in their 40s, in their 50s, in their 60s. It depends. Those are two different paths. You're kind of either trying to move up, either in title or in status or in expertise, or you're trying to move out into something else. Only you can tell. And in fact, some people figure that out by pursuing both at the same time. And in pursuing both at the same time, trying to see where does it land, what can I generate on the more of the same boosted path. That's the reason people talk to headhunters, for example. That's more of the same boosted versus something else, exploring things that maybe are more entrepreneurial or more creative. You figure it out. But of course, there's no answer to that. Now, people always say, well, am I going to have to take a hit financially if I'm reinventing rather than boosting? It kind of seems to them that boosting is the safe route from a money and standing point of view. And it's not always the case. I've seen a lot of people be very pleasantly surprised that they could make more in the more creative route. And I've seen people very unpleasantly surprised thinking they were taking the safe route and ending up out of a job. So I cannot answer that question, I'm afraid.
Can you say a little bit? So you've now alluded to this process of doing this, right? How you experiment like potentially different ways, and in fact, there's one chapter in the book which is called Crafting Experiments.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you could say a little bit about this. How can people kind of try this out a little bit?
Yeah, and I see there's a question in the Q&A about that. Mark is saying it's sometimes hard to craft part-time experiments. The job market is sometimes full or nothing. How do you deal with it? Yeah, so it is very hard.
We should also say that Mark says, thank you so much for your life-changing book. You skipped that over in the question, but he also has a wonderful compliment in the book.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you, Mark. So first of all, let's talk about what experiments are. Experiments are things you do actively to explore a path or to develop a skill. So it could be anything. It could be freelancing. It could be taking on a project or going on a task force. It could be volunteering. It could be helping friends with their business plan or their business stuff you do on nights and weekends. It could be taking a board seat. It could be teaching a class. It could be taking a class. Those are experiments. And there are ways of exploring, getting new knowledge, getting new connections, getting experience in an area. That's what they are. Now, Mark is absolutely right. Sometimes it's really hard to carve out time to do anything more when our jobs are very full on. People who have that kind of situation will often try to take short sabbaticals, pull together their vacation time, things of that sort, in order to be able to explore, because it's hard. Other people manage to get more efficient about their day job so that they could squeeze in some of these part-time experiments. It is amazing, the more, kind of necessity is the mother of reinvention. Let's just say that. It is amazing how, as it becomes more urgent, we manage to squeeze in time one way or another, but it is intense running side hustles, part-time experiments.
You have these examples of the natural experiment, right? A term which has become very popular in kind of research, in particular in economists. And you adopt this term here by saying, like, sometimes there's a natural experiment that people basically kind of get thrown into a new challenge or into a kind of career. Can you say a little bit about how this might happen, or how this kind of can benefit people?
Yeah, I mean, a natural experiment means you got involved in some extracurricular activity simply because you were interested in the topic or the sector. You know, so a lot of people who ended up in nonprofit careers, for example, started out volunteering in something that was simply a cause that they cared about or something that a friend pulled them into. And then what happens is over time, you spend more and more of your time in it, you get more interested and excited about it, you start building kind of your network around that rather than your old job, and you start then to imagine a possible selves that moves into that arena. And that's what I mean by a natural experiment. You weren't looking to change careers, you just got involved in something that eventually became a pull and then a possibility.
The one thing beyond kind of the process or beyond kind of oneself is a little bit the role that networks play. Kind of, who am I connected to? Who do I draw on? So it's not just about oneself, but it's about kind of other people in the process. Can you say a little bit about the role of others and how one can kind of navigate these networks?
It's massive, and there's different roles. So if you think about it, there's two different things going on in a career change. On the one hand, you do need to network for leads, for ideas, for informational interviewing, kind of the more practical side of things. On the other hand, you also need support. You also need support. You need people who you can talk this over with. I just started an online course for our alumni at London Business School on career change. It's all online. And what they appreciate most is that they go through a number of different exercises in small groups with a coach at different points in time. They've got other people in the same boat. And then they say, oh, it's not just me. It's not just me being slow. It's not just me. I see Gustavo has a point about the emotional hurdles and doubts. Everybody's got them. When you are able to verbalize them in a safe space, it's a lot easier. So it's both of those things. You need kind of bridging out to different worlds professionally to get ideas, to get inspiration, to get leads, and then also you need support. In both of those, the thing is, and this is very well established, not just by me, we like to seek the comfort of people who are close and well known and where we have trust. But often those are not the most useful in either of the two circumstances. When it comes to networking for leads and for ideas and for inspiration, we know it's the strength of weak ties. We know that what's really important is to reach out to the periphery of your network, not because your close ties, your strong ties don't want to help you. They do, but they have the same information you do. And, you know, the same information circulates, whereas the people who you've lost track of, it's often actually people who you used to work with before and they've gone somewhere else. They're seeing different things. They're in front of different possibilities, so they can help connect you. The people around you, you exhaust the possibilities very quickly. With regard to the kindred spirits and the more bonding kind of ties, what happens is the people close to us, and this can be especially dangerous, and you can ask Jennifer about this when you have her on the podcast, particularly our partners in life. You know, our career reinvention is a high stakes situation for them too. And sometimes they can feel quite scared about it, either from a kind of livelihood of the family or the bread and butter of the family, or what does this mean for our relationship if this person is changing? And particularly because career transition, and we can talk more about that, is so emotionally fraught. It's so difficult. It brings out all the doubts that we all have. If that person who is your primary support is the only outlet for all of that anxiety and that doubt, it's hard for them. It's hard for them. They're gonna see your most confused, vulnerable side, and that's fine. But you know, it's gonna provoke a conservative impulse in them. So it's really important that you find other people who don't have a stake in your reinvention and who think it is perfectly plausible that you, as an lifelong manager in a very conservative thing, want to be an entrepreneur in a very kind of crazy other kind of domain, they're going to find that completely normal and not counter to your personality. They're going to be encouraging, and that's really positive. So it's a very long-winded answer, but you need networks both for leads outside your social circle and outside your company and maybe even your industry, and you need social support for the difficult part of the process. Having kindred spirits matters a lot.
One thing that is one anecdote in the book which really kind of shook me a little bit. There's one person who leaves, and kind of the CEO kind of then really kind of goes hard on that person, right? And it's like, oh, you shouldn't done, this is so ungrateful, and I've invested in you. And you refer to this book Becoming an X, that it's also like in the answer you just gave, which I found very helpful, these kindred spirits and these new leads, but they're also the people you say goodbye to a certain degree, right?
Yeah.
So you really kind of,
Yeah.
you churn the network. Can you say a little bit, because I think we often think about what are new ties we form, but they're also kind of old ties we potentially cut off. Can you say a word about the challenges that come with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of what makes it really difficult. You are leaving behind a whole social system, people, mentors, colleagues, things you did, things you valued. All of that is really challenging. And that's why, you know, we don't really like to leave that until we have something else that kind of pulls us out, that looks more promising, that looks more in sync, and until we start to see an alternative social network that we can also be a part of. It's just, you know, it's just human. The other thing too is that, you know, it depends on the context, but in some contexts, you do get anger. Like this person who faced the mentor who felt he was being very disloyal. But you also get people who, you know, are a little bit jealous in a way. They kind of like, maybe there's people who faced a similar choice and didn't make it, maybe feel it's too late for them to make the move. But it evokes a lot of emotional stuff one way or another.
Yeah, it's not just, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's interesting, right? That the people who you kind of say goodbye to also reflect on their own identities, right? And so they might actually project a lot of things, kind of emotions they have on you if you actually make that change. One thing, and this is kind of, in many ways, it's the theme of the book, or kind of, I remember I took a seminar with the great Woody Powell and Bob Gibbons, and they always had this saying, who do you argue against? And in your case, this is very clear. You're arguing against this idea of like determine the destination in the beginning, right? Really kind of go for the experiment. But at the same time, you also encourage introspection, but you do it in a very kind of thoughtful way. When to do it, how much to do it, when to kind of stop, reflect on what happened. Can you say a little bit about the role of kind of introspection, learning, how to kind of find the right balance, not to fall into paralysis, but also kind of to actually learn from the process?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So, you know, sometimes I kind of overplay my argument to be provocative, which is don't think, just do. But of course, it's a balance of the two. Where I see people get into trouble is in the early stages, they want to figure out in their head, and they don't want to do anything until they've got the destination clear or the right answer. And that's definitely a recipe for paralysis. You know, if some introspection at the beginning gets you somewhere, it lets you identify 1, 2, or 3 pathways, all the power to you. You've identified them, go and do. But if you find yourself in your head still and again, and you know, it's not helping you, you've got to try some things out. Now, once you start experimenting with different possibilities, you start connecting to new networks, you're dealing with that emotional turmoil, both, you know, it's a kind of a moving on and letting go. It's kind of the saying goodbye, but also saying hello. It's moving away from something without having fully left it. It's approaching something or moving towards something without knowing what it is. All of that is a lot of grist for introspection. You know, what's going on here? How to make sense of it? What am I learning about me? Where am I confused? You know, all of that. And that's really helpful. Once you've got new material to think about, to reflect on, fantastic. But one of the things I always say is self-reflect out loud. Try talking with people, coaches, life partners, kindred spirits, possible mentors, people who are, you know, one of the things people always find it really helpful to take a course when they're in this situation And a lot of the times the content doesn't even really matter, but it's that it gives them a context in which to connect with people and have these conversations. And once you have to articulate things, it makes them real, it makes them more clear. I was just interviewing somebody about his possible selves, one of the people going through my course. And he said, I just hadn't, I hadn't articulated it before. I had to do the exercise. So all of a sudden I articulated, kind of the alternative paths. And now it's easier for me to talk about them and to identify possibilities because I've had to articulate them.
Herminia, one thing which is
I can't keep up with all the questions coming in. I'm trying to look.
I'll do this. I'll do this for you, Herminia. You don't have to.
Okay.
You don't have to worry too much about it.
Okay.
One question I would like to kind of pop in, which surprised me because knowing your research, gender doesn't play a big role in the book. And I wondered why that is. So I was curious why you didn't make gender more of a topic. Are these general trends are so dominating? And in your work and kind of teaching classes, did you see like differences according to gender, what people struggle with, what kind of approaches they are taking?
Yeah. So people always ask this question. I didn't study gender in this because it wasn't salient. It wasn't coming out. In any study that I have ever done in my life, I always strive for gender balance. And sometimes the gender issues just hit me in the face, and there they are, and you got to talk about them because they're there. And by the way, if we talk about my other book, Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader, they come up a lot more because it's about moving up in an organizational hierarchy. But here they didn't hit me in the face because what I was trying to understand is what is the process of making your way to a new career. And there is zero difference in the way men and women make their way to a new career. You have to experiment and you have to network in new networks and you have to work to make sense of it. And that was not gendered in any way. At the time that I first wrote the book, there was a slight tendency for women to be more likely to stop in order to find the time and the bandwidth to explore and reinvent, whereas men seem to be more likely to explore on the side, not losing the day job. And of course, that has less to do with gender and more to do with who's the primary breadwinner and what can the family afford. But that was really the only difference that I found. And today we see a lot more men taking sabbaticals, actually. So yeah.
You have this beautiful chapter on between identities, and I would like to link this to Diane's questions. How do you handle imposter syndrome? You're not explicitly on imposter syndrome, but you're kind of like, oh, I don't fit anywhere. I might not be good at anything. So I very much when Diane wrote her question, I was like, that's the thought I also had. Like suddenly you're not good at anything anymore. So how do you deal with imposter syndrome as part of these kind of transitions?
Yeah, so I'm going to be slightly technical here because I get why you would ask about imposter syndrome, but this is not imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is I just got that big CEO job and somebody's going to find me out. Somebody's going to figure out that I don't have the qualifications or the smarts or whatever. I don't know why there's somebody knocking at my door, but I might have to answer it. Okay, somebody's taking care of that. That's always the problem of working from home. So anyway, so that's imposter syndrome. What is more like, and you might, but what's more like the difficult feelings that people have in going through transitions, it's I don't know who I am anymore. I'm not this that I used to be, but I haven't figured out what that is. Have I lost it? Do I know who I am? Do I know what matters? I shouldn't be confused by this stage in my life. Now, as people get older, and this is something that I'm looking at a bit more, there do come into play more doubts. Can I still be relevant? Is my expertise outdated? Is it always going to be, people younger 20 years younger than me, you know, getting those roles. So there is a little bit of that. But that betwixt and between feeling when you are in transition is more about who am I, and can I answer? I'm kind of taken by the big existential questions, and can I answer them? And do I have a clear enough sense of self to engage in any kind of search process that will lead to something productive? And it's normal. It's a normal part of the process. And in fact, you would be abnormal not to go through that, because you are indeed losing your normal identity anchors. You're losing them. You're moving away from something. You don't know what the next thing is. You don't know how long it's going to take. You're probably on your own going through it. It's not like you're in business school and we're all going to come out with the MBA and have recruiters come at us and everything else. It's completely different. It's a kind of an on your own, very undefined process. And so it's normal, but it's also productive, because real change requires loss. It requires losing possibilities. It requires renouncing possibilities. And so being in that kind of liminal state, that kind of undefined state, is also a bit, it's generative. It gives you a fertile ground to experiment and play with other possibilities. You're not as bound to the rules of the game that defined you in your earlier role.
This kind of what defines you or defines the game. Aswini asked the question about social comparison. Like, it's very hard, right? You socially compare yourself before, you might kind of anticipate who you socially compare yourself to after. Can you say something about, so he writes here at 10:11, how to identify what I should be without comparing myself to what others think is successful? When reinventing, how do I stay true to who I am, what I'm meant to be, instead of reinventing myself towards a goal that is not me? So this struggle kind of figuring out who one is, kind of how to measure one's life, so to speak. Any more thoughts on this? I mean, we've already briefly touched on this.
Yeah, so, you know, I'm not a big believer in what I call the myth of the true self. We are many possibilities. You know, as Ralph Waldo Emerson said, we contain multitudes. There's a lot of potential there, and it all depends on who you meet and what possibilities come your way, which of those potentials get expressed. But for sure, one of the big struggles of midlife, largely defined, is, am I going to become my own person, or am I going to let myself be defined by other people's expectations, by what society thinks is a good job, you know, what sounds good at a cocktail party? Or am I going to try to figure out what is it that is going to make me happy and is going to fulfill me? So there's a struggle. There's a struggle there that is always part of this. And it's another one of those things that is not easy to figure out beforehand. It's another one of those examples of what I mean by deep change. What does it really mean to be self-authoring? What does it really mean to be your own person? And sometimes it's only by confronting different options and really comparing them and trying them on for size almost, that you figure that out.
You have one part in the book which really kind of, how should I say, surprised me, because my prior was so different, where you point out that the magnitude of change is highly subjective. So it's very difficult to actually, you basically discuss two people's change, and you're saying like, well, from one vantage point, this person made the bigger change, but from the other's vantage point, actually, that person made a much bigger change. And it's a little bit to the question of magnitude of change. So we need ask, my question is, how would you apply the concept of pivoting in exploring a career option? And the idea of pivoting in entrepreneurship is like, it comes from basketball, right? You keep like one foot in place and you just move the other. And so the idea was a little bit, or like, I wonder what your think is on like, how do you transfer this concept of pivoting to like career transitions?
Yeah, I mean, that is what most people do. It's very, very hard to jump from one thing to something completely different. You're always pivoting on some kind of skill set that transfers to the other context. Sometimes it's more visible than others, or you're going through a kind of a very lengthy reskilling, upskilling educational process. And still, there is the aspect of pivoting. I'll give you an example from somebody whose story I've been following more recently. She was a chief compliance officer at a big Fortune 500 firm, legal training, but wanted to do something more creative post age 50. And I saw there's a question there about post age 50. And so kind of the fantasy possible self was becoming a documentary filmmaker, but with big questions: can I make a living out of that? And so the pivot, one of the pivots that she worked on is setting up a film company to produce corporate social responsibility short films and promotional material for firms like the one that she worked with. You know, she's in the film world. She's applying old skills, but she's also incorporating some of the new things she's learning as a filmmaker. And so there's always an element of pivoting. The other thing that's important to understand is that sometimes you cannot make that transition to a new career in one big leap. So there's a lot of pivoting in the sense that I'm going to make a smaller change. I'm going to keep this foot here. I'm going to do consulting in this area, but it allows me then also to move to this adjacency and develop there. And then over time, maybe that thing grows and becomes more viable, but it was a kind of maybe a series of pivots.
Salvatore asked about what's your take on the portfolio career, as we're already talking about doing like different things. Any thoughts on portfolio careers?
I've got lots of thoughts on this. So some people love it, some people hate it. Let's just put it that way. Some people love it in that it gives them creativity and flexibility, and they have some things that they earn money from that are their cash cows, and they have other things that they explore and get to be more creative about. And so they love that novelty and mix and constant learning. Other people feel like it's not meaty enough. I need to have a big role where I can make a big contribution. And it's, for them, portfolio careers can be a bit lonely. I'm kind of mostly working on my own, doing all these different things. I miss the team. I miss mentoring people. So there's a little bit of both. I've seen a number of people who went portfolio who have boomeranged back into full-time roles. So that's a common thing as well. You know, there's a lot of experimentation and iteration, which is both good and I think scary for people at the outset of the process.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that the portfolio can almost be like a transition state itself, right? So you try out a bunch of things, you find something new, and then you basically double down on that. Okay.
I mean, the classic transition strategy, particularly if you've lost your job, is you set up to do some consulting advisory on the things that you know how to do in your sleep, and you leave a little bit of time for exploring new avenues.
So this is and this brings me a little bit to Gayen's question, who asked, is it harder to reinvent yourself when you have already left your job or when you are still in a job? And this is like a major difference, right, in terms of urgency, time you have available. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, it could go either way. So the thing that makes it, when you're still in your main job, you don't have to tell people you've lost your job. You don't have to tell people you're taking time off. And so you're a bit more legitimate, but you have less time and you feel very torn. I've seen people, they're feeling very, very torn. You are pretending to be a full-on committed person, even looking for that next promotion while you're exploring all these other things. That's tough. But you know, you've got your paycheck and you don't have to explain to anybody that you're out of a job or trying to figure it out. When you try to do it after or outside of a role, you have more time, but that can also be anxiety provoking if you have a little bit too much time on your hands and you're still unclear as to avenues and you have more explaining to do. People are very shy about having to explain that they've lost their job. It feels shameful. It feels humiliating. They're afraid they're going to be judged. And so, you know, for some people that is less than ideal, but for others, it gives them the gift of time to step back, reflect, decompress. Because it's really the other thing too, is if you're kind of on the verge of burnout, and lately I've interviewed a number of people who are absolutely there, it's really hard to be creative with yourself. It's not just about time, it's emotional availability, bandwidth. And for some people, it really takes having had some time to recoup and restore and decompress and everything else before they can get a little bit more creative about what they're going to do next.
The question who got the most votes here has been by Francesco. Would like to hear how to best reconcile with a generalist, how a generalist can navigate a specialist environment. Any thoughts? Because very often career transitions, right, might actually turn you from a generalist into a specialist environment, or vice versa, right? You have an example in the book where one person is not sure if she has the skills to become CEO. So any thoughts about this kind of generalist specialist transition?
So the question is generalist to specialist. Going generalist to specialist, you either have to go back to school to get the specialized skills or get them in, on the side. It's, if you're going to, it all depends on what the specialism is, but by and large, people go the other way around, from specialist to generalist. Going from general to specialist, you've got to acquire the skills, the experience, and sometimes the credentials.
Gustavo asked a very kind of, a very honest, moving question. He refers to what you said before about experimenting. He asked, how do you recommend people to navigate and overcome the emotional hurdles and doubts that often accompany these transitions? And I think that's something we can all kind of relate to.
Yeah, no, I'd seen that before. I thought I had spoken to it. It is, first of all, knowing that this is true for everybody. Everybody's going to have doubts and emotions and uncertainties and fears and all of that. It's just normal part of the process. Why wouldn't you? Moving into something uncertain about one of the most important things in our lives. So it's only normal. I think the best way is to have other people to talk about it with, to share those things. The other thing is, it's back to the getting started. The fear factor goes down a lot the more you do. Now, it can be, the curve can go the other way. If you've been at it for a while and you haven't gotten any traction, it doesn't feel any better. But for a lot of people, the fear is highest and those doubts are highest at the beginning when you haven't gotten started. In this course that I'm doing, we asked people we asked people a lot about who they were talking to about their career change ideas. And then we correlated it with their sense of confidence in being able to make this a success. And the people who were talking to more people, there was a straight correlation between number of people you were talking to and confidence in the ability to make a success. I think it's keeping it to yourself and kind of, sitting alone with your fears that is the worst thing that you can do in this process.
It's interesting that you would almost find exactly the same in entrepreneurship. People are always kind of concerned about other people stealing their idea.
Oh, always, yeah.
And so there's actually a beautiful research paper which shows that more than 70% of people who think about becoming an entrepreneur don't share it with anyone. And then basically typically don't go anywhere. So they completely want to keep it to yourself, kind of afraid of embarrassing themselves, afraid that somebody steals the idea. Yeah. But if they don't kind of engage with anyone on it, they basically don't develop the ideas, they don't develop confidence in doing it, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really important.
A question about like this kind of, as you pointed out, to discuss it with people or like to seek people's support. So Jayesh asked, how do you actually kind of pull on your network for favors without sounding desperate? Like suddenly you might actually need a lot of support, but any take on this, how to activate your network to kind of get support without,
So, let's just remember, these are relationships. So you're going to ask in ways that are commensurate with the relationship. You're not going to, you're going to ask more of people who you've had more of a connection with, and you're going to dip a toe in the water and ask just a little bit of somebody that you don't know. It's, if you don't know the person, you ask for a 15-minute coffee. You don't ask them to read the draft manuscript of your new novel. It has to be in proportion to what the relationship is. And you've got to realize that you've got to reach out to lots of different kinds of people. One of my best pieces of advice for getting started comes from some research that shows the power of dormant ties. Dormant ties are people that you know, but you've lost track of them because they moved to another company or to another country or whatever. You haven't seen them for a while. And so the exercise is just reach out and say, hey, I've been thinking about you because I'm thinking of, this business project or my career or whatever it is. I'd love to exchange with you on that, or I'd love to reconnect with you. And by and large, people are very willing, and you get some interesting perspectives because those are weak ties by definition. You're not seeing them. They're not in the same little bubble you're in right now. The worst is when you're trying to get all of that support and ideas from the people in your immediate circle who are not going to have any new ideas because they're seeing the same things you are. But you start, and then you see, is there a connection there? Is this person happy to talk to me? Maybe the next time we can have lunch instead of a coffee. But people are bipolar here too. Either they're afraid to ask anything at all, or they ask way too much. I'm sure you get emails like this of people who you've never met in your life asking you for stuff that would take half a day of your time. And of course, you're not going to do it. So when people make it easy for others to say yes, it's easier to say yes.
The first insight of all of this is actually that people should obviously kind of buy and read your book. But so this brings me to the question, which relates a little bit to, I think, what Elizabeth is asking here, is among the people who have read your book and among the people who follow that approach, what is like a typical pitfall? So to bring this back a little bit, I recently talked with Tom Eisenman at Harvard Business School, and he said, like, I created this book, How People Should Kind of Create a Company, and then I talked to the students and they were still failing. And so I wondered what are the people who read my book are doing wrong. Which I think is a good way of thinking about it, to learn about kind of problems in the manual, so to speak. So for people who buy your book and read it carefully and take it as a manual, what is your impression are still pitfalls people are falling into, or what's the most likely thing that people might misunderstand or not getting right?
Yeah. Okay. So one is staying at the reading books. Oh, okay. So I really like this book. Let me read a few other books and keep reading books rather than actually doing stuff. So, one of the biggest pitfalls is staying in your head. That's one. A second one is, so you start and you're experimenting and you're trying things out and you're reaching out to people, but inevitably it takes way longer than you ever expected. And so you get really impatient and you get back to those headhunters who had ideas for you that were absolutely not what you wanted, but at least it's something concrete. And so, it's kind of like you leave the bus stop, maybe just as the bus is about to arrive. You kind of quit a little bit too early. So there's sometimes you have to do that because you need to make a living. But sometimes it's kind of losing, just not having the right expectations about how long it might take. So I've got to think about it some more. What do people who read the book still get wrong? Because, I mostly get feedback when, yeah, you're absolutely right. It took long. It was miserable. I'm not the only person going through this. And, they've made it out the other side, but I don't get as much feedback on those who say, hey, I read your book and it still didn't work.
We're all subject to this kind of selection bias. No exception on that. So we've talked a lot about kind of what people in mid-careers kind of face. Isabel Finger, who has been at Insight for a long time, and is an MBA from Insight, if I recall correctly, asked about what young people should do. Like, what would you tell young people? What skills should they learn to be prepared to potentially go through career transitions? Like if I'm like early, I go to college, but I obviously have a career I'm aiming for, but I should also potentially anticipate, right, that I go through career transitions. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think for young people, one of the most vital things is to work on your network from a very early stage and to pay attention to it. Because, in early career, we can be very successful simply on the basis of expertise because, it's the networks don't seem to be playing that much a role. But networks are really vital in terms of keeping your eyes open to possibilities around. And I don't know if you've seen this, but there's a spate of books on the quarter life crisis, the 25-year-olds who are freaking out because they don't know what to do. They've come out of school. They've tried a couple of jobs. They've hated them. They don't know where next. They're thinking, do I go back to school? And, at least going back to school is kind of a normal option. And so they end up in our MBA programs because they still don't know what to do or in something else.
Right.
But it's just not letting yourself get encapsulated by a network of people who are doing exactly the same thing you're doing, because then you don't see other possibilities. And also you anchor on a certain kind of lifestyle and kind of financial package, which might keep you from exploring other things. But there's lots of people who are, here in London, there what used to be a thing called Escape the City. And it was for late 20s, early 30s professionals in banking and consulting, lawyers who just didn't want to do that and needed a support group of people also going through that process.
Herminia, you said you struggle to keep up with the questions. They are just questions who keep on coming. I also struggle to keep up now, but it's 10. We're basically at the end of the webinar. There are lots of people who simply say, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for sharing your insights. Lots of people who have already kind of read the book and thanking you. Lots of people who are excited about the book. For example, Markus Krug here writes, I just bought 2 of your books. Thanks for your insights. I should probably mention, you can see it there on the background, actually on the other side. Herminia has a second book, Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader. If you continue to be excited after working at Entity, I certainly was, and so I switched to the other book. Otherwise, we have the great pleasure in the next webinar to welcome Jennifer Petriglieri. Herminia, maybe normally I would introduce the next speaker, but maybe I can leave it up to you because you know Jennifer very well, to say 1 or 2 words about Jennifer yourself.
She's terrific, professor at INSEAD. So many of you may have had her. She's taught a lot of different things. And she's worked in a lot of very interesting arenas. Her last book was called Couples That Work, which is about the dual career issues that you faced, at whatever stage of career. If you have a partner in life, they're part of that conversation, and not having that conversation appropriately makes it more challenging to come to a creative solution. But she's got lots of other things that she works on, and she's very interested in creativity. So I will let her and you, Henning, introduce her in the full splendor of all the interesting things she does. But I think you'll find her really interesting.
So yes, so we'll have Jennifer in about 4 weeks on January 10th. So you can see it on the screen. We also have the link in the Zoom chat. So if you immediately want to register, this time I think we hit the upper limit of registration. So if you're curious, now would be a good time to immediately register. We also have other webinars coming up beyond Jennifer. These are typically announced to the Insight alumni. You can also simply follow me on LinkedIn. What we will do is that there are 40,000 thought leaders on LinkedIn, but just one Henning Pizunka. So you can also simply follow me on LinkedIn. We have just kind of put in the current link in the Zoom chat. Otherwise, I'm German. I lose my passport if I start late or go over time. It's 11 a.m. At the East Coast or wherever you are. But this was the hour. Herminia, thank you so much for a fantastic book. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Henning. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody.